I am here to talk to you guys about fermentation today. It has become, you guys actually are getting into something that's going to become the next craze. This is the next big thing in health foods, and it's fermentation. There is a reason why we don't do it in restaurants. It's illegal. It's pretty much the worst thing you could possibly do, and I'll go into the reasons why, mainly because the health department hates people keeping things out at room temperature or just warm, because bacteria forms in those conditions. The problem that they don't know, or the thing that they don't know, is that we're doing a natural fermentation. We're not adding anything that's going to form bad bacteria. We're using good bacteria. Fermentation actually eliminates E. coli and salmonella too. It cannot form in a lacto environment. So it's a lot of science. There is a lot of science in this. I try to condense it all down to be as simple as possible so I could teach it to a kid. I myself am just a foodie. I cook for a living. This is what I do. I teach food. So my knowledge of fermentation is based on just the cooking process. I know a little bit about the science of it, but I don't know the chemical equations and all of that fun stuff, and I don't think you guys need to know it either. But it is very, very interesting. And so I thought I'd do this talk because one of the things that we fear most is bacteria as the American culture. But there are two types of bacteria in the world. There's good bacteria and bad bacteria. And so we're talking about good bacteria today and why we need it. So what is it? Pretty much fermentation is just converting a carbohydrate into an acid or an alcohol. It's like pre-digesting your food. So if you were, I broke this, sorry. So what it does is it just starts to break down the food for you. So when you're eating and you've got weak digestive enzymes or you don't have as strong of a gut to help break down the food, when you're eating fermented foods, you're eating something that's partially digested already. So it's beneficial for you in that sense. And it's a naturally occurring process. We're not doing anything to the food that it wouldn't do on its own. So fermentation uses certain ingredients that you might not see normally, but at the same time, it's not something that's that hard to do. So let's go on to the next one. So the most common ones are fermenting with a starter. So the yogurt you had, that's fermented with a starter. Or sourdough bread, fermented with a starter. Those are things that you add into it. So you can add salt, whey, starter cultures. And what it does is it stops the bad bacteria from growing by adding good bacteria into it. Wild fermentation. Doesn't use a starter. Pickling is a form, but I'm going to go into pickling versus fermentation in a sec too. Wild fermentation you had today too. That injera, the bread. That is considered a wild fermentation because all I'm adding into it is water. You're allowing the food to ferment on its own without anything else added into it besides just water. And salt is, sorry you guys. So there's different ways of fermenting. One of the cool ways of fermenting is with salt, and that's usually with the pickling way. So there's the difference between pickling and fermenting. Pickling is the addition of vinegar. What happens when we add vinegar, though, is that we're adding a fermented food into something that's not fermented. So what happens is it doesn't ferment the food. It's just there to preserve the food. So fermentation is a type of preservation, but it adds things into the food as well. Whereas pickling, you're not adding anything into it, but it'll preserve it for you. A lot of people, if I were to tell you to go home and start actually fermenting on your own at home, would you do it? And what would the reason be? The smell? Smell? Okay, smell's definitely one of them because the more putrid it is, the better it is, to tell you the truth. It's true. When you're fermenting, that smell actually helps you know when it's ready. The one reason why people don't like pickling or they don't like fermenting at home is the fear of doing it incorrectly. There's common bacteria that we like to be scared of. E. coli. Botulism is another one, and then we've got salmonella as well. Botulism, let's talk about botulism first. It can occur in fermentation. We're not doing anything. We're not heating anything up to the point where we're killing microorganisms. We want those microorganisms. Botulism occurs because we take away those microorganisms. Yay, sweet, thank you so much. Because we take away all of those. And so yay. Okay, so we're right here. As the bacteria divides, lactic acid forms, which stops the growth of bad and dangerous bacteria. Does everybody know what lactic acid actually is? It has nothing to do with milk. I, for the longest time, thought it did. So anytime I read that word, I assumed that it had to do with milk or milk products. It's not. Lactic acid can be found in vegetables and fruits as well. It's what keeps things kind of crunchy on the outside with the pectin too. So what happens with lactic acid is it can be found in a whole bunch of different foods, and that is what protects the food from going bad. And, yep. So the history of it goes way, way back. Asian cultures, Japanese, they have natto beans, the soy-looking beans. Asian culture, Chinese culture, we have fermented tofu. And then you go into the Mexican culture, South American cultures, and then you ferment vegetables. So we've been doing this for quite a long time already, and nobody's died from it yet that we know of. So it's a process that we continue on, but we stop because of the fear of bacteria. But now we're understanding bacteria more, and so it's being brought back. Obviously, this is a little bit of information, but Louis Pasteur was the one that definitely took the credit for it, but it has been done for a long time. We just didn't know what was happening when we were fermenting. So the different ways to ferment is salt dissolved in water or brine, the best way to do it. This is the most common way of fermenting, and it preserves the food the best and allows for the natural lactic acids to come out. The reason why people don't like doing this, though, is because of the amount of salt you need to add inside. It does need to be quite salty. The salt is what preserves it and prevents mold from forming. So the more salt you add, it does get more salty, but at the same time, it's also preserving your food for you. So what it does is it hardens the pectins to give it more crunch, too. Whey is the dairy-based. Collect your whey from now on. When you have yogurt, and you know that layer of extra liquid on the top, that's the whey. You can take that and you can make more yogurt out of that, or you can actually take whey, add it into vegetables with salt, and you would be creating a fermentation with a starter, because the whey would be the starter. So what you can do is you can ferment vegetables with whey, salt, and a little bit of water. You'll ferment in double the amount of time, but you'll be still preserving that crunchiness. The only thing is it's dairy-based, so you have to be careful that you're not lactose intolerant. Freeze-dried cultures, you can order them online and you just add them into the glass jars or whatever it is that you're using it. You ferment with other foods. So I've made yogurt with yogurt, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec. It's pretty easy. So just a basic formula, a quart of fermented food requires about 1 to 3 teaspoons of salt. So it's not that much, but it can be a lot for people who are watching their sodium content. So you can take that and make your own combinations of whatever it is. So benefits of the fermented food. Probiotics is still a big discussion. It's not a solid science yet. I know Activia makes you feel like it is and that you should be eating it every day. And it is. It's good for you, but the real science behind it is still definitely being debated. Fermenting is like digesting your food, so it absorbs more easily. So for people who can't digest easily, it's really good. It balances the acid content in your stomach. So it actually makes your stomach feel better. When you're too acidic or too low in acidity, it makes you feel a certain way. Your stomach will feel uncomfortable. Eating fermented foods balances it back out for you so that it makes your stomach feel a little bit better. It's really good for diabetic patients. Reason being that, like I said, it's already started digesting the food for you. So it doesn't work your pancreas like a normal food would. It's already started breaking things down for you, so it's really good for diabetics. Traditional fermented foods produce a lot of different things that protect it. So you don't have to worry about traditional, the growth of pathogenic bacteria. And then traditional fermented foods also help the body produce this great thing, which I will tell you because I can't pronounce it. Did I even pronounce it? I'm not a science person. It's the neurotransmitter that helps your stomach go to the bathroom. It's a neurotransmitter in your head that will kind of help your bowel movements just that much smoother. So that it activates that in it's a neurotransmitter that it links to. And you can save money because you make it at home. So pickling versus fermenting. So again, pickling is a vinegar, so it doesn't lend anything to the food, and fermenting is creating its own good bacteria. So the tips, you have to use organic fruits, vegetables, and spices. Main reason being, if your food has pesticide on it, it's not going to ferment. The pesticide is preventing the microorganisms from fermenting the food. So you can, but it doesn't taste as good. Filtered water. Chlorine is the reason why foods go bad. You want to get as much chlorine out of your water as possible. So either boil it forever, or you can filter it, whichever way, Brita, whatever. But the chlorine content is what you want to make sure of. And environment-wise, you want about 65 to 75. We're lucky in California. It stays like, if you can find a dark spot that's pretty cool, like in a pantry, great. I'm going to talk about a few different places to put it too. But if it gets too hot, just reduce the amount of time you ferment for. So if you have something that usually takes 6 days, reduce it down to 3 days if it's over 100 degrees outside. And just follow the recipe. You can also buy airlock fermenting lids. So they're lids that will lock the air out because there's bacteria in the air that lends itself to the food then. Oh, so I'll show that to you. I'll show that at the very end, but I'm just going to go over the recipes that I have. So the pickled cucumbers, I just added that in because I wanted to give you something that you can start taking and just start working with. You don't have to use cucumbers. You can use carrots. You could use broccoli, cauliflower, really any kind of vegetable. And you can just use the jars that you buy at IKEA with the lock lid on it, or you can buy the balls jars. Balls jars, though, rust. The lids rust if they touch water. So you're not canning here. We're not boiling these guys. So you don't really need to spend that much money. Really just find something that can be airtight as possible. So let's talk about Ethiopian food. So I decided to go with an Ethiopian menu because fermentation usually takes 2 to 3 days. I have no idea how many people I have 2 to 3 days in advance. I usually do it a day in advance. So I couldn't do any recipes that usually take 2 to 3 days to ferment. Most recipes out there take that long though. The goal of fermentation is also that sourness that you get. So when you get that sourness in food, the way you get that sourness is obviously over time. So this is a 1-day injera. If you left it for 2 days, it'll get more and more and more sour. You can make this and cook it right away too. You just don't get that fermenty taste with it. Has anybody worked with teff flour before? No? Okay, so this is teff flour. Teff flour is this guy right here. Teff flour is made from teff. There are a lot of articles out there right now that say teff flour is high in calcium, iron, and there's one other thing I can't remember. It's not high in iron. The reason why it's high in iron in Ethiopia is because of the soil content in Ethiopia. So you need to make sure that it's a very healthy grain that you should be using because it's not used commonly in foods. And it's also one of the smallest grains there are in the world. It's a really, really great ingredient to use. Unfortunately, you can't find it at Mother's. I was only able to find it at Wholesome Choice for some reason. So it's something that you can use in your gluten-free baking because this is gluten-free. And I'm going to show you what you do. Really easy. It doesn't even, I gave you guys the recipe, and it's 1.5 cups of the flour and then pure water. So this is where it makes a difference. The water that you use will help it ferment or stop it from fermenting. So use as Use more water if you want, just because this thing dries out pretty fast. So I'm gonna just add 1.5 cups of it, and I'm gonna let it sit, and you guys will see what happens. 1.5. And it's not a very pretty dish, as you've seen. If you haven't had injera before, it's what they serve all Ethiopian food on. So they make a big slab of it, and they just start putting stuff on top of it, all the sauces and all the dips, and you tear it off and you eat it like that. It's really healthy, but like quinoa, we've been buying a lot of it in the States, and so what's happening right now is it's getting too expensive for the Ethiopians again. And so what they're resorting to is adding other grains into here. They're adding rice flour into here, and they're adding some other stuff. Can you guys see that? Yeah, sweet. Okay, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of water and mix. And you add baking soda and salt at the very end just to give it its fluff. So it doesn't look like a batter, and you cook it like a pancake almost. It helps to have a non-stick lid, a non-stick pan with a lid. So it's really, really, really it's gooey looking. Add more water to it. And so that is injera. This is all that it is, and I'm gonna cook some up. But while I cook it up, I wanted to also show you yeast, because I find yeast to be one of the most amazing foods that we have in the world. Add more. If you are one to make a lot of bread at home, stop buying the individual packets of yeast. Go to Smart and Final and buy a big bag of yeast. This thing only costs about $7, whereas those little ones are like $2.99. This is dead as of right now. Yeast gets brought back to life. So the way that you activate yeast is with sugar and warm water. Yeast's best friend is warm water and sugar. It hates salt and it hates cold. So what you want to do is give it the environment that it likes. And so I'm just going to keep mixing this and let it sit for a little bit. And then I'll show you that. But here I have a little bit of yeast. I'm going to feed it, you can feed it anything. You can feed it sugar, you can feed it honey, just something sweet, something that it likes. And so I'm going to activate it with just a little bit of sugar. And then to get the water to the correct temperature, I had sugar right in front of me. To get it to the right temperature, you use this portion of your hand. This is the most sensitive part of our body. That's why we test baby bottles. And so we want baby bottle warm. So you need to be able to put this underneath the water, and it should just be warm to the touch. It shouldn't be too hot. Yeast will die if the water is too hot, but it won't die if the water is too cold. It'll just take longer. So if you're really scared of killing your yeast, all you have to do is just make sure you're using cold water. The recipes that used to tell you to activate it, do all this ahead of time, you don't need to. You only do that because you're afraid that your yeast is dead. And most of the time it's not. It's still alive. And so if you store it in your freezer, you're fine to go. So I'm going to let this sit. In about 5 minutes, it's going to start foaming up and start pretty much activating on its own. So this then can become sourdough, because you take that and you make a bread with it. You make a starter. Same idea as the injera. Depending on where you are in the world, it'll start picking up flavors from the air. San Francisco sourdough only tastes like San Francisco sourdough in San Francisco. You cannot get it in New York. New Yorkers can't have San Francisco sourdough. Peter Reinhardt, who I've worked with, is the king of all breads. He travels with his babies. He calls them his babies, and those are his starters. And they're just little bottles of activated yeast with a little bit of flour inside. Depending on where it is, he labels it with the country. So if he's in Australia, he'll label it his Australian starter. If he's in San Francisco, it's his San Francisco starter. All of them taste different. Try it out. Make breads in different parts of the world if possible, or just make it in different areas. It tastes different depending on where you are. So I'm going to cook this up right now, and I just want to show you. So you get a pan just like that, non-stick, whatever size you want. Usually they don't do mini ones. Usually they roll them up You don't do a mini one. I really wanted to do mini ones, but people told me not to. They said it wasn't traditional enough. And you just need a drop of oil. Traditionally, you don't flip these. You keep them on one side and you flip it when you serve it. So it's still kind of spongy. You take the leftover stuff and you add it into the salad that I made earlier. That salad is supposed to have leftover injera on it that's kind of crunchy then, and it'll soak up all that extra dressing that's in there. So I'm just going to add this in, and then I'm going to spread it out, just like a pancake. And then I'm going to put the lid on and just let it cook on its own. And it's going to puff up. It's going to do the little bubbles that a lot of the pancakes normally do too. And that is it for the injera. Any questions about that? It's really good. If you never tried it, try it out. So the next one is the Berbere spice blend. I just wanted to give this to you because if you make Ethiopian food, this is essential to your cooking. Buy yourself chilies that come in a bag like this. They're usually in the supermarket spice area. When you de-seed them, they're less spicy. But this is the part that if you're really afraid of spice, this is what you need to do. You cut it up, and there's this area right here that holds all the seeds. Take that guy off. That tends to be a little bit spicier too. And then if you really want to go all out with this, you can take that, toast it on the stove for a little bit, and then grind it. And the way that you grind it is you just put it into a spice grinder. So once you put it into the spice grinder, it comes out, and then you're ready to go. The other things we added into it are fenugreek, and I know I say I don't flip it, but I felt like flipping that one. You add fenugreek into there, garam masala, coriander, all these great things, and you grind it and you spice it up. It's very, very spicy if you use a very, very spicy chili. So I say if you want like a little bit of sweetness, go for like a pasilla chili pepper. Pastillas are really good for this. And so if you don't really like the spice but you want some color into there, add that. And I used the smoked paprika instead. Smoked paprika just tastes so much better than regular paprika. You really want the paprika in this recipe just for the color. You want that rich, rich color out of it. And so that's what you add into it. So for the Ethiopian chicken stew, also pretty easy, but the main thing is onions and ginger. Onions and ginger are staples that they use in a lot of their foods. If you've had Ethiopian food, I attempted to make this a healthy dorawat. Dorawat is just chicken, onions, tomatoes, and an egg. That's all. I made it differently in the sense that I added kale, potatoes, and carrots into it. So if you want, you don't have to add those veggies, but it just makes it that much heartier for you if you do. So here, just before. So this is the injera, just like that. And when you're ready to serve it, you would put all the stew right on top of that, and then serve it like that on a plate, and people would tear off pieces and eat it that way. If you're serving it for a group, what you can do is you just take it, you roll it, and then you cut it into portions. It's really good. It's really good with honey. It's not traditionally, it's usually a savory thing, but it's good with like honey or anything that's sweet, fruits, dried fruits and things like that as well. So for the chicken, all we're gonna do is we're gonna take onion and garlic. Use a lot of onion. So cut from root to root, right down, and then peel. You don't need to do a perfect dice for this, you just want a rough chop. But since you're all here, I'll show you. So I'm just gonna take off one end and take off this. And then go back in if you dare, one more time. And then go in and chop. You can also do it in the food processor. Nobody would know the difference. The amount of time that you would cook it on the stove for, it's completely okay. And then for the ginger, if you want to peel, ginger doesn't need to be peeled, it's just something common, because what happens is there's just dirt that likes to hang out in these little grooves. So if you want, peel your ginger with a spoon, just to get the skin off of it. and then you just take a grater or a microplane. I like microplanes a little bit better, these guys, but if you have one at home, they go bad pretty quickly. They don't last, that sharpness doesn't last, and ginger is the reason why. It gives you more ginger juice towards the end of its life. But you just want to add a little bit of ginger. Just like that. And I'm going to add that straight in with garlic too, into the pan. And then you add tomatoes and whole chicken pieces into it. I'm going to show you. Use this one right here. And then you're just going to add your spices into it as well. So I'm going to let that cook for a little bit. It'll brown up, and then you can add your chicken. There's 2 types of chicken in this recipe, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, it's a good thing. It's got chicken thigh in it. Chicken thigh lends flavors that you can't get from chicken breast. Chicken breast is a bland piece of meat that really isn't very good. It's healthy, I understand, but if you want a little bit more flavor, because this is the option you have. I'll say it this way. Instead of using chicken stock, use water and use chicken thigh. That way you're not adding something fake into it, and you're getting the flavor from the chicken thigh. You're not getting it from this man-made chicken stock. Chicken fat is good for you. I render chicken fat all the time and I cook with it. It just has more flavor in it. So what you do is, I have my chicken breast here, but you cook that all up, add the tomatoes and all the water into it, and you just let it cook like a slow cooker, and it'll start to shred apart. And at the very end, you're going to add your potatoes and carrots straight into it too. So I'm going to add this guy in, even though it doesn't have any liquid in there yet. And then I've got my spice mix. I'll leave this up here for you guys to see. I made this yesterday. Different families will have different variations of it, just depending on what they like. And so this one is pretty simple to make, but I'll leave it up here so you can smell what it smells like too. And that is it for the stew. Kale is commonly found in Ethiopia, so that's why I added it in. And I just used you just use the Trader Joe's one. The bag of kale, $1.79, can't go wrong. So you add that in there, and then that's it for the chicken stew. Now the fun part, the last one, yogurt. Who's done this before? Yeah, some people? With a machine or not? No, by hand, right? Yeah. The French are notorious for creating the yogurt machines. They have these cool yogurt machines. I had a French instructor when I was in culinary school. He used to bring in these little, it's a round machine, you put little containers in it, and then you put a lid over it, and you've got yogurt. And it's because it keeps it at a perfect temperature. It's like an incubator, pretty much. And a thermos does the exact same thing for you. You just put warm water on the outside of your thermos and you're ready to go. I had to make it enough for 30, 40, 50 people though, so I had to be a little bit more creative, and so I came up with this. It's not my idea, I have read it before, but it works really, really well. So, if you're doing this for the first time, go buy yourself whole milk and whole yogurt. I know you probably don't eat it and you probably won't use it again at home, but it just helps you understand the process of it. If you're using light or low fat, you end up with very ricotta-y, very loose looking yogurt. The fat content in these guys are what's holding it together. If you like a really, really thick yogurt, add a little bit of dried powdered milk into the yogurt before you let it start fermenting, and then you'll be fine. So all you do is you take milk, try not to use anything that will try not to use aluminum. Use stainless steel. So I'm just going to take some milk, and I'm going to cook this milk to 180. I'm just going to show you what you would do. So you would cook this until 180 degrees. Get yourself a candy thermometer, go to Michael's. You want it at 180. Then put a water bath. Create a water bath. If you don't know what that is, it's just water with ice in it. Or, I've got the most ingenious way of doing this. You freeze water bottles. Freeze water bottles and then put them inside a Ziploc bag and then put it straight into the milk. That way it'll cool it down for you. It's what we do in restaurants. We have these big sticks that you fill with water and you freeze them, and it cools everything down to you because you want it at 110 degrees. 110 degrees is when you're going to add your active cultures, and your active cultures come from your yogurt. So this has already got the active cultures in it, and you're adding it to something warm so that it can start acting for you. So I'm going to add the yogurt straight into pull 1 cup out, and then add yogurt into it. So pretend this is warm. Then, and this is the hard part though. When you add your yogurt in, full-fat yogurt is very, very thick. It's like a big clump on its own. So this part of mixing is actually quite important. You don't want to break up everything, but you want to stir really, really gently and let it melt into the milk. The milk is warm, so it should do it pretty easily. But if you overbeat it, that's when you start getting the ricotta cheese too. You're breaking up the yogurt too much, and you're separating too much of the fats from it. So now that that sits, you're going to put this straight back into here. Oh, and I didn't, it chunked inside there. And then I use this. I used a hotel pan with the lid. So it's just like this, filled to the top with yogurt. And then I put it in my oven with a light on. The light is just the perfect temperature for all types of fermentation. If you're making bread at home and it just doesn't seem warm enough, it's just so cold you can't do anything about it, don't turn on your oven. Just turn on your oven light and put it in there. You can also put boiled water, right underneath it to keep it extra warm in there. That way it's an environment that's contained. There's a lid to the door, so nothing's coming out. There's a lid to the yogurt, and you're letting that warmth kind of ferment it. And you wake up the next morning and you've got fresh yogurt ready to go. So it's really easy. And then you save some of that yogurt to make your next batch of yogurt. And you save some of that and you make your next batch. And you keep going on, and you've got yogurt for the rest of your life, and you just made it all by yourself. So that's it for the yogurt, and the granola is pretty simple. Just add everything together, mix it up, and then serve it with the yogurt. The longer you let your yogurt sit, the more tart it gets. And so a lot of people like that really sour yogurt. Just let it sit for a little bit longer. The other thing you can do is that liquid that's left over, that's all whey. You can take that extra stuff right now and ferment your vegetables. So you can take that and make your pickled cucumbers, or your, not pickled, I keep using that word. You make your fermented pickles or your fermented vegetables of whatever kind, or fruit. And so save that stuff, because that stuff is the healthy stuff that's coming out of the yogurt. But I'm up here. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to ask, and come up and see that spice if you want too. And next week is, do you know what's next week? No, me. I can't remember which one I'm doing. I know I'm doing a talk about, vegetables as the main course. Yeah, that's a good one. And then the other one is the Asian or Chinese food therapy, hot and colds. So if you guys want to learn about that, come back out. Thank you.